In the lonely valley of Red Mesa, where the wind carves songs into ancient canyon walls and the golden light of dusk stretched shadows into thin ribbons across the cracked earth, a quiet tailor named Harlan Pike lived a life so small and peaceful that most travelers forgot him minutes after leaving. His tiny wooden cabin stood beside a forgotten trail used only by wandering traders and storm-worn riders searching for shelter. Harlan's world revolved around needle and thread, his days filled with the steady rhythm of sewing, mending torn saddles, stitching ripped tents, repairing worn-out shawls, fixing anything others thought beyond saving. One evening, as Harlan was closing his cabin door, the ground beneath him trembled, first softly, then violently, shaking the roof and rattling every tool on his walls. Startled, he rushed outside expecting a buffalo stampede. But what he saw instead stole his breath and froze his heart. Through the settling dust framed by the orange glow of sunset, walked a towering figure, massive, human-shaped and yet impossibly tall. It wasn't a creature nor a monster out of a frontier nightmare. It was a girl, a giant girl. She stood nearly 20 feet tall, her legs wrapped in patched hides, her torso covered by a torn cloth barely holding together, her long dark hair tangled with feathers, leaves, and fragments of grass from countless nights spent wandering the wilderness. Her enormous eyes, though intimidating in size, carried softness, an old, aching sadness that made Harlan feel as though she had spent her entire life in silence. She knelt slowly, placing her enormous hand upon the ground to steady herself, and when she bent low enough for her face to meet his height, her voice rolled out soft yet powerful, like distant thunder softened by clouds. She told him her name, Tala, the last daughter of a long-forgotten tribe of giants, who once roamed the mountains before fear, hunters, and storms scattered them into extinction. She had survived alone, hiding in shadowed ravines, crossing plains under moonlight, wearing the same ragged dress since childhood. But now the dress was torn beyond repair, shredded by storms and time. Passing scouts had whispered about a man in Red Mesa, a man who could fix anything, a man whose stitches held stories together the way others held rope. Tala had come seeking help not from a magician or a warrior, but from a tailor. Harlan trembled at her size, but the loneliness and exhaustion in her eyes stirred an old compassion deep inside him. When she asked if he could mend her dress or make a new one, he looked at the enormous, torn fabric in her hands and realized this was no ordinary request. This was destiny knocking on his tiny cabin door. Swallowing his fear, he nodded. A breath of relief escaped Tala's lips, blowing dust across the ground. Over the next days, Tala visited at sunrise, sitting carefully outside Harlan's cabin like a giant mountain of hope while he measured endless lengths of cloth, sketched designs, climbed ladders to reach her shoulders and waist, and stitched tirelessly through giant strips of hide and woven fabric. At first she spoke little, but soon her silence warmed into words. Stories of the old giant tribes, ancient dances beneath moonlit skies, songs that echoed through valleys long before humans settled the plains, and of the storm that tore her from her family and left her wandering alone. Harlan listened, mesmerized, feeling as though he were speaking with a living legend. In return, he shared pieces of his own heart, how he had lost his family in a devastating flood, how sewing became his anchor when grief tried to drown him, and how loneliness had slowly become his unwanted companion. Tala listened with tenderness far greater than her size, her enormous eyes softening with every word he spoke. With each passing day, the dress grew white, elegant, ceremonial in its beauty, stitched with the symbols Tala taught him, markings of protection, unity, and rebirth. He bleached hides until they shone like snow, softened them until they felt like silk, decorated the edges with feathers Tala gathered from high mountain ledges, added beads carved from river stones, and shaped the dress into a masterpiece large enough to drape a being as tall as the canyon walls. When the final stitch was done, Harlan stepped back, overwhelmed with emotion. Tala slowly stood, the massive white gown cascading around her like a waterfall, and for the first time since childhood she saw herself, not as a monster or outcast, but as someone worthy of being seen. Tears slid down her enormous cheeks as she whispered that no one had ever done something so kind. Harlan, voice trembling, admitted that he hadn't sewn the dress only because she asked. He had sewn it because he cared for her. Tala lowered her massive forehead to the earth, the closest gesture a giant could make to an embrace. and whispered that she felt the same. But neither of them knew that far across the plains warriors were gathering. Drums were echoing and destiny was thundering toward them. The next morning, before Harlan could sip his coffee, the ground trembled again, stronger, louder. Rhythmic like countless feet marching, a massive dust cloud rose on the horizon, swallowing the light. Tala stood tall, her white dress glowing in the dawn, and Harlan felt fear coil inside him. As the dust cleared, an army emerged. Hundreds, then thousands of tribal warriors on horseback and foot, banners towering above them, painted with red, black, and gold symbols of the old mountain tribes. Drums thundered, chants filled the valley, and warriors surrounded Harlan's cabin in a sweeping half-circle. At the front rode a tall leader, his hair braided with eagle feathers, his chest painted with ancient markings. When he saw Tala, he froze. Then his voice thundered her true name across the valley, a sacred name she had not heard since childhood. The warriors erupted into chants, pounding their spears into the ground as they realized the impossible. The last giant blood daughter had returned. Tala bowed, honoring their traditions. But when the leader's eyes fell upon her white dress, he gasped. Those symbols stitched along the fabric, symbols Harlan had learned from her, were ancient wedding markings sacred to the tribe. As whispers spread like wildfire, the leader approached Harlan. He asked if he had sewn the ceremonial dress. Harlan nodded, trembling. The warriors' shock deepened, but not with anger, with reverence, for they understood instantly what the dress meant. Tala had chosen a partner, a companion, a heart bond, and the tiny tailor at her side was the one she had chosen. The leader placed a hand on Harlan's shoulder, declaring that love, when true, needed neither equal height nor equal blood, it needed courage. And no one was more courageous than the man who stitched a wedding dress for a giant girl, out of kindness and love. The valley erupted into celebration. Fires were lit, drums roared, banners flew, women danced, and the warriors prepared a sacred space surrounded by towering torches and ancient stones. Tala knelt beside Harlan, her heart glowing with joy as she whispered that she never expected to be welcomed again, not like this, not with love instead of fear. Harlan held her massive finger like a hand and promised that no matter how different they looked, their hearts beat the same rhythm. As the sun reached its peak, the tribe performed ancient rites, asking the spirits to bless their union. Tala lifted Harlan gently, holding him to her face, and he placed his hand against her cheek as the warriors roared in approval. The ceremony became a celebration unlike anything the valley had ever witnessed, firelight glowing against Tala's white dress, drums shaking the stars, warriors dancing in circles around the couple as their love stitched two worlds together. In that moment, the lonely tailor and the ragged giant girl became living legend. And dear viewers, if this powerful story touched your heart, if you want more emotional, cinematic tales filled with love, adventure, and destiny, then make sure to subscribe to the channel, because your support inspires more epic stories just like this one.